Hello, 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 everyone. We see you coming back in. We want to give everyone a moment to join before we get started with our very first session of the day. So come on in, make yourself at home. We have a powerful conversation in store for you. So welcome, welcome. We'll continue to let people come on in, join this powerful session today. And as we get started, just a couple of reminders for you. You can find out more about each of our speakers, more information about them on the main Career Thrivers platform. So make sure you go there to get more details about our speakers today. And also, we want to allow you to ask some questions. So make sure that as you're listening to this conversation, if you have any questions, please drop them in the Q&A section, and towards the end of the conversation, we will get to as many of your questions as possible. Well, without further ado, I want to get started on our first session today. We're having a fireside chat with Decosta Jenkins. If you don't know him, you will know about him because he's an amazing man. He is the president and CEO of Nashville Electric Service. And, he plays a vital role in making sure, that we have the energy we need to keep things moving. And we know that's important because without energy, we wouldn't even be here today. So we thank you for all of your doing, Mr. Jenkins. And also, he serves on several boards, y'all. This is a man about purpose. When I tell you he's on the Tennessee Rehabilitative Initiative in Corrections, he's in the Goodwill Industries Board, he's on the Tennessee Valley Public Power Association, YMCA of Middle Tennessee, and get this, he recently joined the Pinnacle Financial Partners Board. So just to name a few of all the things that Mr. Jenkins is doing, he is a man on the move. And we are so blessed, Mr. Jenkins, to have you here today to share your experience with us and to give us some insight from a CEO who's made it to the top. So we want to give you a chance to say a few words before you and Brittany get into the fireside chat.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm extremely excited to be here. Black history obviously is important to me. And, I just applaud Brittany and you, Joy, for taking the time to orchestrate an event such as this. I spent some time with IT reporting to me, and as it's grown, I don't spend as much time, but I have a real appreciation for how hard it is to be in production and also being a part of the program. So you're just doing a great job. I really appreciate what you're doing. And I want to shout out to Brittany because Brittany grew up right down the street from me, and she and my daughter are great friends. And Brittany has always been a go-getter, and it's a real treat to see how she's progressed and made her way through. A little bit about me, they gave a little bit about my background, but I'm a recovering CPA. I started my career with Deloitte, and that's relevant because I want to talk a little bit about the framework from which I lead. And I think everybody should have a business framework. And so there was a group led by a guy by the name of Jim Collins, and they studied a number of companies, 11 publicly traded companies, and they tried to understand what made these companies successful. And from that, Jim wrote the book, Good to Great. And so in his book, he talks about three main concepts. And the first concept is a hedgehog concept. And so there's a Greek parable that talks about how the fox wants to eat the hedgehog. And he puts together a new strategy every day to eat the hedgehog. And every time he comes to the hedgehog curls up into a ball, and all the fox can see is his quills. And so even though the fox is thinking and strategizing every day, the hedgehog knows one thing, and he focuses on that one thing. And so the first concept is a hedgehog concept. And if you want to go from good to great, the first thing is focus on the thing that you're really good at. Yeah, you notice the hedgehog didn't try to outrun the fox. The hedgehog didn't try to fight him. He just did what he did. He did it every day. And then the other thing it suggests is you think about, while you focus on what you do well, what's your economic engine? Because if it's not going to produce income, you got a hobby, you don't have work. So you need to make sure that it's work and not a hobby. So you need to focus on your economic engine. Then the third thing is it's got to be something that you have passion. And so, starting with me, I tell you, I'm a recovering CPA and I just went on the board of Pinnacle. Whenever, and a little bit more about that before I finish that. I started with Deloitte back in 81 in the merge firm of Deloitte. Start with two straws in the merge firm of Deloitte. And then in 91 came to NES as a CFO. In 2004, got promoted to president. But even from 2004 to now, I tell everybody I'm a recovering CPA because that's what I do well. When I was young, I was good at math and those things. And then I realized the economic driver would be being a CPA because when I looked at all the different careers, if you were fortunate enough to work with one of the it was Big Eight back then you could make, a decent living. And so that's kind of where I've stayed. I stay in my lane, whenever I'm interviewed, you talked about the different boards I'm on. One of them you didn't talk about was I'm on the board of trustees for the University of Tennessee. And that's why I've got the orange towel. And so, when they interviewed me and they asked me, what committee should I be serving on? And I said audit. Again, I'm a recovering CPA. And so same thing, Pinnacle. I think they're going to start me off on trust and community affairs, but eventually I'll get to the audit committee. So, that's one of the concepts. The other concept, because it's going to play into some things I'm going to talk about a little bit later, is you need to manage the bus. And so what that means is you've got a bus. And so who should be on the bus? And where should they sit on the bus? And so the first thing is, the book suggests, and I swear by the book, is you should find very smart, very capable people. A lot of people that get in leadership are worried about people being obedient. I want smart people. I want people who are smarter than I am, and just let them do what they do. And so the way the book suggests is you have your smart, visionary people on the front of the bus, and you have your problem solvers on the back, because the problem solvers, they're going to solve the problems, but you need the visionaries moving you forward. And so, as we talk about leadership, and particularly as it relates to Black history and diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the concepts that I share with businesses when I talk with them is if you really want to go from good to great or be successful, you can't let biases or prejudices stand in the way of hiring the person that might get you to where you want to be. The person that has the vision, that has the ideas, might not look like you. They might have ideas different than you. And so if you only want people that look exactly like you, you might miss out on some real opportunities. And that's, I think that's a key. Then the last thing in the book, and then I'll let you guys ask me some questions. But again, I want to give you some framework of kind of where I'm going to be coming from. The book that I'm talking about is Good to Great by Jim Collins. I saw in chat somebody missed the reference. The last thing is you want to have a level 5 leader, and that's what I'm striving to be. So you start off as being a skilled professional, and then you become a good team leader. Then you become a good manager. Then at some point, when you've got, 20, 30 years like I do, you become a visionary. And then you want to become a humble leader with a lot of resolve, because what you want is you want to be able to hear what your talented group has to say. But at the end of the day, you got to trust your gut and do what you think is right. And so, it's within that framework, as we talk about Black history, as we talk about leadership, I just wanted to give you that background so you have some idea, some context of kind of where I'm coming from. Now, I hadn't read Brittany's book yet. And if I had, I'd probably be using that as my framework. But as soon as I do, I'm going to change from good to great.
I don't know about that. I think you picked the perfect one, and I had to just turn around. It's at the top of my bookshelf, and the bing that you all just heard was the notification. I just put it on the platform, so it'll be the first thing that you see, so you can go there afterwards. So I don't want anybody searching, trying to figure out how do I get my hands on the book. We got you covered. We got you covered, so you'll be able to order if you don't have it. So okay, I'm gonna try really hard to call you Decosta and not Mr. Jenkins. Okay. We had that little pre-talk. I'm gonna try hard. I'm gonna try hard. So Decosta, if you would share with us, so one of the things that Jim Collins talks about in the book that is literally on my list. So a little intended pun there, but he talks about a stop doing list. That in order to get to the thing that you are great at, your zone of genius, you've got to think about what do you need to stop doing. So I'm curious, what's on your stop doing list?
Well, I'm old now, so I don't have as many things as I did when I was young. But I think when I was young, the thing I had to do was I had to focus on. Well, I mean, let's talk about when I became president of NES. When I became president of NES, the thing I wanted to do was one, help us focus on who we are. We are a local power company, and that's what we do. We need to do that well. And so what we need to stop doing was entertaining all these other notions of all these other different businesses that we could be in, because all it does is distract away from your focus. And so that's kind of the stop doing list I started with. And so I think at my age, I'm pretty old, and so there's not that many things left because I've tried to stop doing those things. And again, it all gets back to focus. And you're looking at the three things that you've got to stay focused on. One, what is it that you do well? What's your economic engine? And three, what are you passionate about? Then everything else has to take a back seat. Your priorities got to be those three things.
And I know for sure one of the economic engines that's been clearly articulated and proven time and time again for organizations is the impact of diversity, equity, and inclusion on the bottom line. So I'm curious from your perspective, we have leaders joining us from an array of corporations and organizations in Nashville and beyond today. What advice would you perhaps give to people leaders, particularly who are trying, whether it's now or have been trying to prioritize diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, I think the thing that the word that I would use is you have to be intentional. I mean, it's easy to do what you've always done, but when you start talking about DEI, there are opportunities now, and you have to take advantage of those opportunities. You have to look for those opportunities. If you are looking to fill a position, it's easy to go pick the same type of person you've always picked. But the thing I would offer to someone in a position like that is the world is changing. And if you want to be a part of a changing marketplace, I just got off the phone with a friend of mine, and he's got a publicly trading staffing company. And we were talking about this very issue. And he was explaining to me that in the IT world, there are a lot of Asians and Indians, Hindu Indians. I hope I'm saying that correctly. And in his recruiting base, he didn't have, he just had, using his term, white females. And he said, we had to change because when we're trying to recruit the type of talent we need to get the right people on the bus, we can't look at just one group, and we have to look at who had the skill set. And when we had the skill sets, these particular groups had the skill sets, and I didn't have anybody that could relate to them. So I think the challenge is you need to understand that the world is changing, and that if you're going to be a very profitable company, if you're going to be a successful person, you got to get the best team that you can find. And so if you've got prejudices or whatever, and you overlook the person that may put you over the top, I think professional football is a great example of this. You know, when I was growing up, the thought of an African American quarterback was not, you know, not something you saw very much. But now you see that, you know, the likes of Deshaun Watson and others, and people are taking notice. And, you know, we want the best player in that position. And we don't care what he looks like or what his background is. We want the person that can perform. And so that's the advice I would give to anybody in that position, because at the end of the day, you're only as good as your team. And so you need to assemble the best team that you can.
That's so good. You are sharing so many gems, as we would say, this morning to kick us off. So I'm curious, as we're thinking about, you know, who's on the bus as well as our economic engine, I would suspect that you've had to take some risks to get where you are. So thinking from the perspective of some of the Black professionals that are on today who are trying to position themselves for the next level to advance in their career, can you talk a little bit about maybe one of the risks that you took in your career and how it helped you to get to where you are today?
Yeah, I think you know, the risk of leaving Deloitte was probably the biggest one, because um, yeah, I had an opportunity to move to Chicago and be a partner in Deloitte. But you know, my wife really didn't want to move to Chicago, and so I had an opportunity at NES, and so I took that opportunity. But you know, it was, you know, it was a risk because didn't know exactly what I was going to achieve at NES, and had no thought that I'd end up being president. But you know, it was something that, you know, I had to do because, you know, a big part of I'm a religious guy, and behind my religion is my family. And so what I wanted to do was make sure that, you know, no matter how much uh, success I had, I wanted to, one, know that when I came home, I had a home. I didn't want to come home to a house. I want to come home to a home. And so it worked for me. I mean, my wife is happy, uh, my son is happy, and my daughter sometimes is happy. I mean, that's an inside joke between Brittany and
Now hold on, that's my girl. That's my girl, Mr. Jenkins. You gonna turn into Mr. Jenkins real quick with that
Well,
comment.
see, the reason why I threw that out there, she said she was going to join in, so I had to get her in on throw you know, a shout out to her. So
Definitely a shout out. She is the model of a thriver. So proud of Mia, for sure, for sure. So we have some questions that have come in, and we definitely want to ensure that you all are a part of this conversation, because you are. So you see the Q&A box there. As you have questions, feel free to drop them. I think this is a great one because so often, and maybe this is just a conversation that my husband Joe and I have, but we sometimes talk about how a lot of the focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion right now is really around women, Black women, and as it should be, right? We have a Black woman vice president. Tashonda Duckett was just named new CEO at TIAA. Like, you know, Black women are on the move in terms of, I believe, taking our rightful place. But I can say that a little bit easier because I am a Black woman. So one of the questions is, what was one of the biggest challenges that you faced as an African-American male in the workforce, and how did you overcome that challenge?
well, I think the biggest challenge I had was, you know, being a trailblazer because, you know, I started Deloitte in 1980, and I was the only African American there. And so, um, you know, I had to go through all the things that you do when you're the first. And so trying to understand their culture and trying to help them understand mine. And there was some rough spots. Needless to say, there was some rough spots. And so, you know, it was helpful that, I guess, mid-career, the managing partner was a white guy by the name of Bill Hawkins, decided to be my mentor. And so, you just can't place enough value on a mentor, because there's a story, and I can't remember who told it, but it always resonated with me. There was a guy who was an instructor at GM, and he was teaching the workers how to make hubcaps. I mean, we don't have hubcaps on cars. Remember back then we used to have hubcaps. And so he explained that the minorities couldn't do it. And when a minority would come in, he said, you put it up there and you pop it and you go. And they would do it and they would always come out wrong. And they observed him training someone who wasn't a minority. He said, you put it up there, you close the handle, and then you go. And so what and that's the thing that is when I talk with my white counterparts, I said the thing that you don't understand is systematic and systemic racism, because in his mind, he was providing the same training to the minorities that he did to everybody else. But in reality, he was setting them up for failure because he didn't focus on his training. So there was this little piece that he left out that was causing them to fail. And I think that's, what, Bill did for me. He explained to me that the minorities back during that time only got to work on government clients and non-for-profits. And he said, you're going to work on SEC clients. And so I've taken two companies public. And so with that resume, it really helps you as you go forward. So, and there are a lot of things that, I could have done and would have done if he hadn't said, well, you really don't want to do that. And so you just can't underestimate the value of a mentor. But the original question is, I'm the first Black president of NES, the first CFO of NES. I mean, as the first timer, when you first walk in the room, you have to understand people need some time. I mean, they really need time because they're not accustomed to you being in the room. And so you need to give them time, and you need to understand it's going to take some time. And you can't get upset at everything because it's going to take them some time. And the thing that I would suggest to anybody, particularly people that are going into situations and they haven't had minorities there before, is you need to decide if you're in for the long term or not. And then, if you're in there for the long term, then understand you have to weather some storms. And I promise you, there will be some storms. But once they understand that you are committed to the long term, they lose interest in the storms because they say he's not going anywhere or she's not going anywhere. And then they say either we can get rid of them or we can help them. I'll tell you this one story, then we'll get back to it. But I had a client when I was at Deloitte, and he did not like African Americans. And he made sure I knew that he did not like African Americans. But the firm was committed to me, so they wouldn't take me off the account. And I wasn't going anywhere. So he decided one Monday to ask me a question. He said, so Decosta, what'd you do this weekend? I said, I'm a golfer. I played golf. And it was amazing, because we were both golfers. That seemed to make me okay. And so he and our friends today. But again, it was only after he gave up the fight and was willing to take the next step that we could find some common ground. And that's the advice I'd give you. Stay in the fight, try to find some common ground, and being there for the long haul.
Yeah, that's such great advice, because I think most of us are at a space now, particularly the younger generation, and I won't even bring in that dynamic because we'll be on here. We could be on here for a while if we add that layer in, but just the sentiment that, we aren't going anywhere. Like Black people aren't going anywhere. Like Black leaders aren't going anywhere. And so I love that nod at resilience. I'll say briefly, in the example that you gave of the mentorship, some would say he was in a position of power. What are your thoughts in terms of sponsorship? And I ask this question because I think so many organizations have done a good job with things like mentorship programs, so we're going to match you with somebody in leadership and they're going to be there to answer your questions, et cetera. But then sometimes what we see at Career Thrivers is this lack of advocacy, this lack of sponsorship to say, it's not just about advice, but it is about access. So how are you making an inroads for Black and Brown professionals? What's your thought on that from a mentorship versus sponsorship perspective?
I think it depends on the individuals. I'm a big believer in sponsorship, but if you have a mentor, he's committed to that it works. The problem has been, at least in my experience, uh, you assign a guy and he's a mentor and he has no passion for it. And so it gets back to the example I gave you with the guy at GM. I mean, he's not given the full story. Because, I think you guys are examples. If you get the full story, you can succeed. We can succeed. But you got to give us the full story. And so if we're, Martin Luther King in his book, Why We Can't Wait, he said, if you start a race among two individuals or two classes of people, and one gets a 400-year head start at any one point in time, who's going to be ahead? That's a given. So the challenge we have is we can't overcome that 400-year head start. But if you give us equal footing, that's all we're asking for. If you give us equal footing, then we can make a difference. And so I think sponsorship requires a much larger commitment, and because of that, you tend to get people that have more passion for what they're trying to do. So I'm going to always lean toward the sponsorship. But again, if you get a mentor that has the passion and his values align with what it is that we're trying to accomplish, it can accomplish the same thing.
Awesome. Marshalla, my good friend from Chattanooga, Tennessee. So shout out to Chattanooga joining us today. She asks, why do you feel leaders aren't putting more diverse people in leadership roles?
Well, I think it gets back to, the conversation we had earlier in Colin's book, Good to Great. We're not, as leaders in companies, we're focused on being successful. And so the conversation has to change from diversity, equity, inclusion being a good thing. You got to move away from that. It's a way to make your company more successful. I think that's where, when we've had the conversation, I think that's where we missed it. They've been doing it because it's a good thing. It's the right thing. No. That's not where we need to start the conversation. We need to start the conversation with, what are you trying to accomplish? Well, I want to be successful. Okay, well, what makes you successful? Getting the right guys on the bus. Well, then, if you want the right guys on the bus, it gets back to what I said earlier. You need to look at the skills and the talents and the abilities of all the candidates. And then when you start looking at brown people or females or whatever, and you say, they've got the energy, they've got the interest, they're smart, they have everything that I want. Why wouldn't you pick them? And to me, that's been what's missing, because, because, we're not looking for a handout. I mean, none of us are looking for a handout. We just want a hand. I mean, give me a hand, let me get in there and I'll show you what I can do. And so I think if you can frame the conversation so that you're not trying to do a favor for somebody or this isn't a benevolence idea. This is an idea that is something that if you look long term is going to benefit your company. One of the challenges that we're facing today as a country is by 2040, Caucasians will no longer be the majority. And so when you look back in my career, back in 1985, Deloitte was starting with diversity training because they knew by 2040, the world was going to look different. And so you can ignore that there's a changing world, and you can ignore that there are going to be different types of people in the world, or you can try to be a part of it. My son, he's a manager at Bridgestone. He's an audit manager at Bridgestone. And, their values are a little different than our values because they're a Japanese company. And, you've got a lot of companies like that from, that are have located here in the States. and they have a very different value system. So if they're, back to my example again, if they're recruiting the right people for the bus, and you're only going to recruit the people that look like you, 5 years from now, who's going to be ahead?
Absolutely. And I know we have some Bridgestone friends that are joining us. So hello to you and thank you for being here. So Decosta, this is your 30th year at NES. Wow. One, congratulations. And two, I think this is a good question from Tracy. She says, you have a successful resume. Have you always had successful performance evaluations? So either at NES or Deloitte? And if so, how did you ensure synergy with your leaders? And if not, how did you move past a bad performance evaluation?
Well, I've been blessed. I've never had a bad performance evaluation. But again, and the advice I'll give to everybody, that's watching or listening today, we talk about, this concept and getting the opportunity. You have to understand that everybody's watching you, especially when you're the first. And so I knew I was the first, and I knew that my success or failure was going to impact generations behind me. And so I was doing everything I could. I was working harder, longer, more than anybody else because, again, at Deloitte, they had not had an African American there, no, and had been many since then. And so that's it was important that I succeeded. Uh, when I took the CPA exam, I studied, uh, long, hard, and I passed it on the first time because I didn't want to be them looking at the minority saying, well, he's a minority. He can't pass the CPA exam, so we'll keep him a little bit while longer. No, I want to get that behind me and then let me focus on my job. And so in any, job they gave me, I wanted to make sure that, I got it done right. Now, again, there are going to be some challenges because everybody's not rooting for you. And so, first thing you have to know who's in the room and you have to know who's on your team and you have to know who you can trust. And so, and then especially if you start, getting good performance appraisals, then, that's a real problem. Then, he's in here now and now, there's a race for the walnut waste paper basket and only one gets it. So now they say, okay, he's no longer a minority, he's now a threat. That makes it even worse. And so, I was fortunate that I didn't have any bad performance appraisals. But in terms of, my leadership, I always tried to understand where they were in this spectrum because, if you know what you're up against, you can deal with it. Um, but if you go in there assuming that because you're a minority and because of this conversation about DEI and everybody's going to love you and support you and nurture you, you're going to be in for a rude awakening. I mean, you need to go in there and what I tell my kids, you go in there and you kill a gnat with a sledgehammer. And that's what it takes. When I speak on these things, particularly when I go to kids in high school, you just have to assume that, everybody's against you. And you have to kill a gnat with a sledgehammer to get ahead. Now, again, I know that's overkill, but at the same time, I don't know that we have a choice. Even today, I don't know that we have a choice.
So let me throw this scenario out there. So let's say in the GM example, you're the colleague that's getting half of the advice about how to put the hubcap on, and thus your performance review reflects that you're a subpar performer, but you are just as good as the person that's getting the full instruction, and they've got a high performance rating. As the team member, do you address that with your leader? And if so, how, particularly if you're not getting the full story about how to put the hubcap on?
Well, I think from my perspective, you've got to know where he is or she is on the spectrum, and depending where they are, I mean that's how you approach it. if they're, because some people are genuine, they genuinely want to do the right thing. And so if your leader is someone like that, then I would go to them and say, I think I deserve better. And again, but I don't want, this to be confrontational. I think that if you had have shared with me this type of information, I would have done all the things you would have wanted me to do. And the way I found out about this information, I found out from my teammate. And so is there a way that you and I can have a conversation so that the next opportunity, whatever information you share with your teammate, you also share with me? Because at the end of the day, I'm trying to make you successful. That's one conversation you could have. But then if they're on this end of the spectrum, then the right thing for you to do is look for somewhere where your talents and your abilities are appreciated. Because you're only as good as your environment. And if you get in the wrong environment, it doesn't matter what you do. Because if they don't appreciate your talents, if they don't appreciate your skills, they don't appreciate your abilities because of the color of your skin or if you're female or whatever, you need to go somewhere that appreciates that.
Yeah, I love that
Listen,
you
but
said
that's
that.
true.
Yeah, I love that you said that. We're always talking about a seat at the table. And I have a good friend, Minda Harts. If you don't have her book, we're going to be sharing some resources throughout the day, but it's a must read. But she always talks about, it's one thing to position and prepare yourself for a seat at the table. It's another thing to recognize when the table doesn't deserve you. And sometimes the table doesn't deserve us. And so we have to recognize when we need coaching or resources to have those tough conversations, which speaking of, so I want to tee up at 3:00 today. We have a 25-year executive veteran from the Center of Creative Leadership that's going to be talking about how to have difficult conversations with your leader, how to manage conflict with your leader is the name of the session. So you don't want to miss that. Decosta, this has been amazing. I want you to have the last word. Definitely, we appreciate you taking out time today to join us. What would you say and leave to our audience today to commemorate Black history, but also to help to continue to make Black history by advancing Black professionals?
I guess two things. One, I guess just one thing, because I don't have time for two. But as we look at Black history and as we celebrate all the accomplishments of African Americans in circumstances where the table didn't deserve them, they were not welcome, but they still made those contributions. And we look at how we have progressed and we look at how we're moving forward. The thing that we can't forget is that there is generational poverty in the African American community. Generational poverty in the African American community. If George Floyd had $20, he'd be alive today. And so we can't forget that. And it's up to everybody on this session to always remember that and keep thinking about how can we fix that? Because until we fix that, there are no answers. Sam Howard was a mentor of mine, and whenever something, we have race relation problems in the country, he had one piece of advice: increase net worth. And it's really that simple. It's really that simple. And so, one of the things that we're trying to do here at NES is when you look around the country, there's a tremendous demand for linemen and electricians and people like that. And there's just not a lot of people interested in there. And I grew up in North Nashville, zip code 3708, the most incarcerated zip code in the nation. And when I look back on from where I came from, if I knew that I could have got my GED and become a lineman and made six figures, I think I would have done that. I think there are a lot of kids that would do that. And so what we're trying to do at NES is uh, figure out, one, how do you get the information to the kids? So, I mean, because you don't know what you don't know. And then once you get the information, what can we do to prepare them to be able to be competitive in applying for those jobs? So, that would be the thing that I would leave with the group. There's generational poverty in the African American community. And until we solve that, you can't solve the police brutality issue. You just can't. I grew up, I tell my kids all the time, I grew up in that environment. I understand what's going on, and I'll cut off because I'm running out of time. But, when you're in a violent environment, everybody's violent. Everybody, and so it's tough. And so police brutality will not be solved until we figure out a way. So those kids that are walking around that have no hope have hope.
Yeah.
Once we figure that out, then I think we'll solve that problem. So
Yeah,
I'm
that
committed,
economic
and I hope
engine.
you guys are too.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you ended on that note. And I will just briefly add to that. Advancing Black professionals today is really a nod at an initiative that is exactly aligned with what you just heard from Decosta. Chase has had over the last several years advancing Black pathways. If you're not familiar, we're going to put it up on the feed so you can get connected with it. I want to say two things about it. One, it's squarely focused on the wealth gap, the economic engine in Black communities. Two, the organization understood the importance of how literally equity in the Black community drives equity across every other diverse demographic. So the focus there, and in them being intentional about it not being advancing people of color or advancing diverse, it's advancing Black pathways. So if you're not familiar, particularly if you're a corporate leader, I encourage you to look into that. This has been great. I'm going to turn it back over to Joy to give us our instructions for our next session. Thank you again, Decosta. And if you all are, I'm sure y'all are like, are we going to, what's the next steps? This Fireside Chat conversation will also go up on the Career Thrivers podcast. So make sure you subscribe there, and we will as well make the replay available for you in the platform. Joy, over to you.
Well, all I can say is, wow, I'm over here taking notes. I don't know about y'all, but there were so many golden nuggets from that conversation, from who's on your bus to diversity and inclusion is about making your company successful. So we've got to be changing the narrative and the conversation. And like Brittany said, there were so many golden nuggets, I encourage you to go back when Brittany posts that on her Career Thrivers podcast to listen to that, because that's a conversation we can listen to over and over and over and over again. Stay in the fight, he said, and find some common ground. So everybody, let's stay in the fight today. So what's up next? We have our next session, which is starting momentarily. I want you to go back to the Career Thrivers platform. You're going to connect to our next session, it's an amazing session on prioritizing racial equity in your DEI strategy. And y'all, we've got a powerhouse. We got Miss Ashley Bond. So you want to go in right now, make sure you get off of this platform, sign into the next session. We'll be starting momentarily. One other thing, we also have a very, very, very special session today at 4:45, a special presentation, the I Am Black History, because we're talking about so many of our people who are presenters today, they are Black history. And while we want to look to the past, we also want to look at the present. So make sure you mark that down, 4:45, special presentation. Bye for now. We'll see you back in just a few minutes.